What time is it? It is 10:10 a.m. tomorrow. Oh yeah, I'm streaming live, sorry, but you're not in it, so it's all good. Yes, it's very cold here. 14 degrees, which is about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, probably. So these people are from a church on the edge of Sydney. It's more a suburb, which is sort of like a white picket fence style. It's a beautiful place. What age group are the people? Probably between 50 and 70. Yeah, there's one lady here who's, I think, 34, and there's one girl here who's 19. There's a dog here too. So I think 14-year-old husky, Siberian husky, who loves to shake people's hands. And would you guys prefer I sit down with you or stand here? We're going to start now. Well, clearly you are people of faith because you came on Wendy's word without knowing who I am. What does Wendy have on you people? No. All right. So thank you very much. Fingers crossed if it works and we get better and people have questions, help spread things to other people that they may not necessarily know. Does anyone here have any relatives or any interest in autism? According to the Diagnostic Services Manual, they no longer have Asperger's. They've classified under high-functioning autism. There is a unique difference between the two. Supposedly with Asperger's, the interest for them tends to be narrow and specific, whereas people with high-functioning autism have a broad range of interests. I didn't know that I had it for a long time. So I was born Friday the 13th, which is maybe that's how the autism started. I'm not sure. I was able to not speak very well, not speak at all actually, up until over the age of 2. But I was able to play the piano from the age of 18 months. By the age of 10, by memory, scored the perfect score at the Conservatory of Music, classical piano. And I'd learnt it through cassette tapes, so I was never able to read music. People just grew up thinking that, I'm assuming they're thinking that I was just some sort of musical genius. I didn't know this, but I couldn't actually walk very well and make eye contact. And I learned to say, how are you, back to people when I was 26. I was taught that by my first psychiatrist after my third suicide attempt, which would have been successful but for my father finding my unconscious body and getting me to hospital, where I was 2 days in a coma. We've gone way too quick. But when I did speak after the age of 2, I was fluent in 2 languages, both Lebanese and Australian, buddy. So my mother was told that I had social difficulties at school, but this was in preschool. When I was 3, it was 1984, and mentioned back in those days, as far as I know. So nobody ever thought that could have been the problem. So it was basically undiagnosed till 2014 when I was 33. Yeah. After the third suicide and recovery, I was diagnosed with a few other things, post-traumatic stress, clinical depression, anxiety, the party cocktail. So by the time I reached school, it's very important not to blame the other students and teachers. But initially it was the students who severely haunted me, and then it became quite abusive as I got older. But they weren't aware. They just thought I was either deliberately being stupid or retarded or something like that back in the day, when I'm sure that a lot of them would regret that these days. So by the time I was age 10, I was severely bashed by a 16-year-old for whatever reason. All of this actually comes into one particular point, which I discovered at 10:04 p.m. Thursday, 3 weeks ago. And that explains, I think, where autism actually differs and how the problems arise, but I'll get to that at the end. By the time he bashed me then and I was left unconscious on the ground, that combined with all of the abuse at school, I decided that I should take up some sort of martial arts. By the time I was 12, I ended up bashing this bully who'd been abusing me for 18 months. And then within me grew a monster, and that monster started taking out people who were bigger than me from that point until about 16. Yeah, the Tourette's didn't help in class. And the other thing that autistic people tend to have is a very bad short-term memory. So they can forget the conversation that they're in. Of course, I'm not like that at all, right? That's called sarcasm. So what I do is I hold on to these bum bags, which keep all my basic stuff in there so that I don't forget what I'm doing. But the feeling is sort of like this. I could be holding my sunglasses, and then 30 seconds later, there's nothing there, and I don't know where it's gone. So that's normally what goes on. But of course, at school, I'd put up my hand, ask a question, I'd forget the question I was asking, and they thought, oh, he must be doing it to create attention or something like that. And then, of course, the child then asks themselves, am I doing it for attention? But then why do I keep forgetting? I must be stupid. I must be retarded. And then over time, when you'd end up going into school and there'd be a crowd of kids who, as soon as they saw you all combined, would start calling you names. And so what I learned to do was to call myself those names in front of the students to stop them from getting in first. And then I spent my lunches in the toilets to keep away from people. But then once they built the music center, I was able to go there and play the piano. So I was able to spend 7 years with a lady which will go by the name of Edith, and she taught me how to function socially. So from the hello, how are you, she then taught me how to understand situations, to make eye contact, to take breaths in between speaking, to wait for Blade to stop whining, and basic skills like that. Now, I was very fortunate because I found out only in 2014, and so did many universities, that one part of my brain called the short-term working memory has an IQ that's higher than what can actually be tested. Most humans have an ability to remember between 6 and 8 numbers if they just hear them. Well, I have the ability to remember between 12 and 16, and there's only a few people on the planet who can do that. And that ability has actually allowed me to memorize what to do with human behavior in every situation. So this comes back to the degree of autism which I have on the AQ scale. The AQ scale goes up to 220, and mine is 191. And there are only 8 people in Australia who have that degree of autism, but only one of them can function, being myself. And the question was, how was that possible? Well, it was because of that ability to remember, okay, at this point in time, I say this, at this point in time, I say that, etc., etc. Am I going too fast? Okay, great. The problem is with those who have autism, what I hypothesize is that when the situation changes too much, they do not know what rule to apply. So what I have to do is actually memorize thousands and hundreds of thousands of rules, right? So for example, today I made sure that I sat in that chair that no one was in, but I waited 30 seconds to make sure no one was going to sit in that seat, so I wasn't taking someone's seat. Whereas someone who didn't have that prior knowledge, who may have autism, might just walk in and sit there, not realizing that someone just got up, and then other people might think they're rude. Right? Because as humans, we are pattern-seeking creatures, and so we look for the simplest, most obvious pattern to explain someone's behavior. But of course, if someone is unusual, then the explanation is also going to be unlikely. Right? Why would it be a normal explanation for someone who's not what you call normal? Right? So what do we got here? So I have been subject of quite a number of studies by a few universities, and that is a continuing process. And it's quite funny to watch them get excited. Whoa, look at this. And I'm like, I'm just being myself. Whoa, he's being himself. It's amazing. So you get these things. The other thing that people with autism have is the inability to screen out most of the information that's going on around them. And that can be quite exhausting, right? But it does have some advantages. So for example, I was sitting in a French class, and after 40 lessons, I was able to learn the language, but they were teaching Italian in the room next door. So I picked up Italian, and I actually became the teacher of French and Italian in that school after 40 lessons. The funny thing is that the students I was now teaching, who were in my class, could not understand how this was possible. So they naturally came to the conclusion that I must have known French before, and I was sitting in the class to learn how to teach. Because that would be, I'm assuming, the most obvious scenario. But of course, that's not the case. Why is that a problem? Well, after the suicide, the fact that I survived was quite disappointing. But I then took on the opinion that perhaps I was saved for a reason. And that reason was to help other people, because that gives me worth as a person to counteract all of the abuse that happened at school by the teachers as well. Like, for example, one teacher said, put your hand up if you think Gabriel's an idiot. And the whole class put up their hands, except for 3 people. So I appreciate those 3 people. They introduced what they call a level in 1993. I was 11 turning 12. A level which is a 1 step below suspension, and that was for being a rude boy. So and that is because when there is more than one person that the autist is interacting with, it becomes extremely difficult to know when and when not to speak. And so even up until today, with crowds, I don't do very well. In the speaking mode, it's easy because it's just sort of like a dictatorship. Sit down. No, sorry. No offense to Germans. My actual IQ is average, even though there's one part of it that's genius. And that's because the other part, which is the ability to recognize facial expressions, is quite limited. So what I've been able to do is memorize the position of eyebrows and eyes and blinking rate. So for example, I can see one person in the crowd, her head has actually gone further in compared to her shoulders, which means that she's actually extremely interested in what I'm saying, right? So I've learned these type of behaviors. And so therefore, when they tested me on facial recognition, I scored higher than any person who's autistic, but way, way, way lower than the neurotypical. And that's because I'm using the genius part of my brain to compensate with all of the memories of facial expressions in the past to map it onto what I think someone is thinking at this point in time. But of course, when you have more than one person, that becomes extremely difficult because so many people are having so many conversations. It just seems completely bizarre to me. I'll be sitting there, someone will go, how was your day? Yeah, that's right. That lady said the thing about the tree, but how about the dog? I'm like, what tree, what dog, what's going on? I don't understand. Just leave me alone. The thing about filtering, what I do is I keep my earplugs with me in general, because like being in restaurants, I start to hear everyone's conversations, which can be a problem, right? You'll hear someone say, yo quiero agua, por favor, like in Spanish, and someone will be like, a la vez. They'll be talking Greek, and then I'll hear someone else like, 49, and I'll start hearing them speak or Japanese or this, and my brain will start hearing every single person equally. which is, of course, can drive you completely nuts. So then what you'll find is people with autism might prefer to have the lights off or prefer to need to recharge in a quiet space. They don't do very well with constant questions that can drive them completely mad. So these are the things I wanted to discuss. And of course, the last thing I was going to say is that they cause a lot of catastrophe, because when you try to help people, people can, of course, completely misinterpret what you're doing, and that happens all the time, right? A lot of the time they misinterpret it in an adverse way. They think you have an adverse agenda or something terrible, and that can, of course, exponentiate like a snowball, turning into something catastrophic, and over years that can turn into being accused of something you wouldn't even dream of doing and having your name over the internet. But it's just a larger scale version of what I went through in school. Fingers crossed the truth will come out, but if it does, it'll come out painfully, which is normally the way my life tends to be. But if I can help people in the meantime and help people understand people with autism and how they think and how they function, then I've done something great. That's all I have. Any questions? Oh, yes, the most important part of the speech. Yeah. So the conclusion I came to comes down to one specific example, and then it can expand. The example was that I was in 1986, I came back from Lebanon in the Christian Islamic Civil War, came back to Australia, and my auntie asked me what I had learned over there. And I told her something that was at the dinner table that was inappropriate, that I'd learned. And she said, "We don't say that at the dinner table." I want to know what you're thinking of that's making you laugh. I learned from that point that at the dinner table not to say that specific thing. But that doesn't mean I couldn't say it at the breakfast table. Now, all right. Now, the problem is, you probably know people who do that, right? And now my natural reaction when I said it at the breakfast table was that my mum said being a smart aleck because I said it at the breakfast table, but I was told I can't do it at the dinner table, right? So the summary is that the inability for the autistic is to abstract across equivalence classes. And what that means is that if they receive an instruction or a rule, they can't take that rule and modulate it across similar scenarios, because they're too different. So dinner table and breakfast table are nothing alike. They are both subsets of tables, right? So you have dinner table, breakfast table, lunch tables, study tables, right? But a neurotypical might say, my brother said to me, "Well, why didn't you realize that you just can't say that in front of people?" Well, dinner table and people are 100 categories apart, right? And that is the problem that the autistic have. And the only reason I think that I can survive is because my brain has memorized those hundreds of thousands of rules across every single one of those scenarios. So I know, for example, breakfast table, that's going to apply to dinner table. It's about a 90% chance. So if you go up a class from dinner table, you go up to table, because table includes the family of all types of tables, right? But then the rule, does it apply? How about everything that applies to dinner? So underneath dinner, you're going to have dinner with friends, dinner at your home, dinner in a public place. Does it apply to all those rules as well? And that's a cross-reference of subsets. So you have one subset multiplied by another subset, which gives you the squared amount of possible subsets. So the brain physically cannot compute where that rule applies to all the different subsets. And then, of course, humans sometimes call things tables that aren't tables. So they might be having lunch at the floor. There's no table there. Right? But that still counts as where you cannot say something inappropriate. Another example I'll touch on is a friend of mine who has a child who I immediately said, that's one of my family. I could see it right there, right? She asked him to get the red and black shoes. He went upstairs and got every single shoe that had red and black in it, except for the one she wanted. And she said, "Why didn't you get those ones?" He said, "Because they have white laces." Now, she thought he was being a smart aleck at the age of 5. So I had to travel back in time, which that's what it felt like talking to her. I felt like I was talking to my younger mother about myself, right? And I explained to her that they have white laces in them. You have to be specific. And that blew her mind. She did not realize that she had to be that specific about the shoes, red and black with white laces in them at the top. Right? You have to be that specific. But of course, the beautiful things of those with autism are things like, for example, they can do things that have specific rules, maybe infinitely better than the average human. I decided to test this IQ. So the last 3 years, I've been doing things like I went and learned Hebrew, and I learned the script in 90 minutes. Then I went and learned Syriac script in 15 minutes. And I've now been able to do the 6-month course in 3 weeks. So now I can speak basic Syriac, and because language has specific rules. And I went back to uni and did a maths degree, and I got a high distinction average, except for the last exam, I always say. So it's come down to distinction, but I never read the lecture notes. I just did the assignments and did the exams. And my brain seemed to know. And 3 weeks ago, I won a scholarship to represent the uni at the nuclear science facility, and things like that happen. because it's not that I'm any smarter, it's that the brain is somehow, at least in some parts of the brain anyway, it's natural for the brain to work with algorithms, which is basically what science is, right? You have rules, you figure out if it's correct or not, you do evidence, you look at statistics, and so it's completely in my domain. So when you say, is someone smarter than someone else? Well, that's like saying, is a fish smarter than a giraffe? Well, they're all adapted, exactly, yeah, fish. They're all adapted to certain situations, right? So that's the point with people with autism. They have their good and their bad, just like everyone else. Thank you very much for coming. Lovely to meet you all. Any questions? So the question was for our listeners in the US. The young lady's daughter-in-law is a teacher out in the country, and she has between 3 to 5 autistic kids at any one particular time. Is that right? And she wanted to know whether they should be in the mainstream or whether they should be on their own. What I can say is that it would help if teachers understood their behavior and how to deal with them, because it's sort of like having 3 to 5 Greek children in your class who don't know English and you're teaching the class in English. So you sort of have to have a translator, for example, in Greek to say cheese is yachara, right? But yachara in Lebanese means something not nice. So it's the same thing, whether someone with autism might, for example, I put my finger in this guy's ice cream when I was 16 in 1997, because I thought that was the right thing to do to make friends with someone. I tasted the ice cream, yeah. And it turns out that most humans use their tongue to do that, which I didn't know. I used my finger, and then he didn't talk to me for a while because he thought I was deliberately putting my finger into his ice cream. He misunderstood what I was doing. So if the teacher understood what the kid was doing, then perhaps it would be better. Yeah. Well, you're very kind to say that I may not have touched on that. I don't think I did. And that's actually really important. Yes. People with autism tend to not, and I see a counselor every 2 weeks, and I've been doing that for a long time. So when I say people with autism, it's based upon my interactions with my psychiatrist, who is a specialist in autism. Right? He tells me what things that I do are general amongst autistics and what are not. And that is one of them, the ability to only see in black and white, which is what makes them great mathematicians. Right? What my brain has learned to do is realize that it is still a black and white, but there are many variables. Each variable, it's like many on and off switches, like a computer, which is why we're probably really good at programming as well, because that's all in binary code, right? Someone with autism tends to be much more stubborn in their thinking. The only way to show them is to let them, and in a situation that is very harmful, but not too harmful that it destroys their whole personality, right? Now, how does one do that? Well, by telling them, can't you see this? They can't see it. The part of their brain, when I'm looking at everyone, I now learnt that everyone has a different perspective, but I don't know what that really means. I just know that the effects of that, right? So they physically can't know it intuitively. So you can't say to them, can't you see it or can't you know it? No, they can't see it. How do you explain it? Well, for example, what I've done with some people is I say, okay, well, if that's true, come test it. It needs to be videoed, maybe for like a whole day, somehow someone video them, and then when that stuff comes out, show them and say, look at that, do you like how you're speaking to mum? Well, it depends on the reaction by the family, right? So if they are sympathizing after he does that, then that's rewarding that behavior, which means that he'll keep doing it. So you don't know what percentage of that is genuine and what percentage is he knows that helps his case. And at 11, he's very, very intelligent already. Well, the first thing I noticed before you said anything, when you said, come to my house, all right, we'll go. When you say to someone who's autistic, we'll go, without specifying a time limit, then, well, when you plan on going, then that means we're going now. Yes, because the problem with hurry is that it's ambiguous. It means 5 minutes or 50 minutes. You don't know. And when it says I'm having a coffee, that means I'm having it right now. But when you sit there and you're actually talking while having it, you look like you're lying because you're not having the coffee during that period. You're talking, you're chatting, you're doing all those things. So I've learned to say, if someone says we're going, in my head, all right, there's a 15-minute tick down, right? But I used to be, if someone said to me, I'll be there in 5 minutes, if they were there in 6 minutes, I wouldn't talk to them again because they were lying to me. If it was there, I would say, for example, when I say, let's go, I am saying, let's go in 43 minutes, get the stopwatch, we'll time it down in 43 minutes. What time is 43 minutes? It's 11:42. No, it's not. What time is it? 11:46. Okay, 11:46. So therefore, between now and 11:46, what are you going to do? I don't know. Well, you have a couple of options. Here are the options. Which one do you want? So it has to be unbelievably specific, like a computer program. I was actually part of a sleep study a couple of years ago from La Trobe University, and they hypothesized, which it's so far deemed correct, that those with autism have interrupted circadian rhythms, which are not regular, which means that one day they'll be tired and then one day they won't be, and then another day they'll be tired during the day, and then once it'll be at night. So there's something about the injection for the melatonin into the body which causes you to go to sleep. I'm sure that's all part of it. They're all variables that factor into the situation. So yeah, like in my case, before iPhones and stuff, when I was a teenager, I learned to write post-it notes, and the whole house my dad would come in, oh my God, Jesus, why all this paper everywhere? Yeah, so he'll come up, look, move this paper from here. So yeah, so it's a combination of that. I also think, I personally, and this is my least popular hypothesis, but I actually think, and I've tested this, limited search situations, I'm pretty sure this is correct, that we've done a reverse. So back in the 80s, it was sort of like, oh yeah, he's weird, get lost, go deal with it, right? Whereas now it's the opposite. It's sort of like, I think because the parenting style has become extremely empathetic, because of that case now, we have kids who have softer parents, right? Now, is that good or bad? Well, it's obviously better than I think maybe most of us here were raised. It was sort of like, oh, there's no food, well, you can starve, Now it's like, whatever you want, my sweet, whatever. And then we sort of raise the opposite type of children. Everything you've mentioned plus that exacerbate the issue far beyond where it needs to be. I can relax, but I relax by listening to like lectures on quantum mechanics or philosophy or something. Yeah, playing the music. Yeah, well, I sort of had the equivalent. When I was 10, my mother got us the Sega, which was back in the day. Do you know Sonic the Hedgehog? It's still massive today with gamers. Anyway, so yeah. And we would spend days, like sometimes I wouldn't sleep for 2 or 3 days. When my mum went to America, I was at my grandmother's place with my brother, and we didn't sleep for like 3 days or 4 days and just play, right? And play and play. And that's when my grades were demolished. I was smarter than all the girls supposedly in primary school, but then this stuff came along, and whew, it's a problem for other reasons as well. There's a psychologist I was listening to last week who was talking about this specific problem, which is, first of all, being autistic, because you're ostracized and put on the edge of society unintentionally, right? But you know it from a very young age. I knew from preschool that the other kids couldn't play with me, and I thought I had a disease or something like that, right? So you're already prone to depression and anxiety and loneliness, etc. So you try to compensate for that, and you look for direct rewards. Now, computer games provide that, just like cocaine, just like alcohol, and some people who have a predisposition to generate opiates after having alcohol. And it reinforces the neurons in the brain to actually to remember how good it feels to play those games. And that offsets the depression. The problem is that it's short term. So you have to keep playing the game to offset the depression, which is always there. And the way to defeat the depression is actually to create meaning, because meaning is long term. If you can become something, you can be great at something, be great at a sport or exercise, or something that they're really good at, that you help, let them perform and other students can see it, and they're somehow integrated within society. All of that helps boost their serotonin levels, which even crabs have. We diverted from crabs 3.5 million years ago, if you believe science or not. They also have the serotonin levels. If you inject serotonin into a crab and into humans, like I do with antidepressants, that's what they do. They elevate your serotonin levels, which offset the depression on a long-term basis, and then you become less addicted to alcohol, to computer games, to other things that give you the short-term boost of pleasure. Yeah, thanks very much. And that ends the speech.